Welcome to this video on Packet Tracer, the network simulation tool that allows us to teach the new national curricula in computing. The software is brought to you from the Cisco Network Academy program, where it's used to teach networking to CCNA, CCNP levels, and working with computing at schools to make it available to teachers across the UK. Okay, so this video is looking at NAT and private addresses. First of all, we have to understand what's the problem, why do we need PAT. Then we need to look at what private addresses actually are. And then when we start to understand what NAT is, how does it all work with only one address? And finally we'll explain this by looking at PAT, or NAT overloading. Okay, so looking back at our network here, we've got Bob's house up in the top here connecting to his ISP, which is using ADSL, and we've got Anne's house down here connecting through her ISP, which is using cable modems back to the internet. The issue we've got is, in the internet there's only a limited number of IP addresses available. IP addresses are 32-bit binary numbers, and despite the intentions of the early people who invented the internet, we've now run out of internet addresses. And as I'm sure you appreciate, over the last kind of 5-10 years or so, more and more homes have been connecting to the internet, and all these end devices here need IP addresses to connect. So let's have a look at how this happens. So if we have a look at Bob's house up here and Bob's PC, we'll just hover over there and we can see he's got an IP address 192.168.0.102. Bob's laptop is 192.168.0.100. and Bob's tablet is 192.168.0.101. So you can see all of the three devices in Bob's house all start 192.168.0, and then they've got specific numbers after that. And if you can remember from the earlier video, these have been allocated through DHCP from Bob's router, starting with the addresses 100. But you can see they're all 192.168.0 addresses, and that's a network component, which is what the /24 mask shows us. The first 24 bits are network bits. So these all belong to the 192.168.0.0/24 network. Let's go down and have a look at Anne's house as well now. So we've got Anne's PDA, which is 192.168.0.101. I think I saw that address a few moments ago. Anne's PC, 192.168.0.102. That seems to be the same as Bob. And Dan's laptop down here, 192.168.0.100. Well, that's a bit confusing because they're the same as Bob's addresses. They're all 192.168.0 dot something, so they're all the 192.168.0.0/24 network. And obviously the query now is, if we go out from Anne's house or Bob's house and we use that as our source IP address, as it goes out here into the internet, if it's coming from 192.168.0.100, if it comes out here into the internet and we now try and send the traffic back to 192.168.0.100, when it gets to the ISP, which way does it go? Because Bob has a device which is 192.168.0.100, and Anne had a device, I think that was her laptop, yeah, Anne had a device which was 192.168.0.100. So out here in the internet, if both those devices share the same address, we wouldn't know which way to go. And while we've looked at Bob's house and Anne's house, in fact this is replicated globally. Most people's home addresses are 192.168.0 dot something, and they all share the same internet address. So how does that work? How can we possibly get out to the internet? Well, the reason they've all got to share the same address is there aren't enough addresses to go around. There aren't enough addresses to give everybody's home and everybody's individual device in everybody's home their own unique address. And we've got to use these special addresses that we call private addresses, and 192.168.0.0/24 is one of those private addresses. Okay, so let's have a little look what happens when we actually send some traffic out on the internet. What we're going to do is we've changed to the simulation mode down here, so that was a real-time mode. We're now in the simulation mode. What we're going to do is we're going to send a simple PDU, so this is just a ping packet. And I'm going to click on ping. I want to send one from Bob's laptop, and I'm just going to send it out to our NetCAD server right here. So I've got my ping packet here all ready to go, and if I just hit the capture forward, I'm not going to explain everything that you see, we're just interested in one particular part of it now. So we'll just do a quick verification here. netcad.com, if I go over that server, you can see the IP address is 107.21.52.76. And if we look at this packet here and click on it, you can see, we just go to the outbound PDU, and the destination address 107.21.52.76. So there is the address of the NetCAD server, and that's how we form an IP packet. We put the destination address here in the IP layer. Let's have a look at the source address. The source address is 192.168.0.100. Where's that in our network? Well, if we hover over Bob's laptop, that's his source address. So that's how we form the packet. We put the source address here of Bob's PC and the destination address of the NetCAD server, and we've got our ICMP packet. So let's just get that progressing a little bit through the network. So here we go. It's been sent up to the router now. Let's have a look inside the router. Let's have a look at the frame that arrived. So it was a wireless frame because it came over wireless. At the IP layer, yep, here it is, source address 192.168.0.100, that's Bob's PC, and the destination here is our NetCAD server, still 107.21.52.76. So all looks okay. Notice what this view allows us to do is it allows us to look at the frame as it came in and examine it and see the framing and the IP layer and the fact that it's ICMP, but it also allows us to look at the outbound details. If we click on the outbound packet, we'll notice something seems to have changed. The destination is still the same, 107.21.52.76, but you'll now notice that the source address has changed. The source address is now 82.10.0.101. So it's swapped the source address of the IP packet. Let's just have a look where that address is in our network. If we hover over our internet router, there it is. It's on the internet side of our router, 82.10.0.101. That's the IP address that was given to us by the ISP, and that is indeed a real world IP address and is unique in the internet. So what's happened is, as the IP packet has hit the router, the local private address, the 192.168 address, has been replaced by the outside address of the router, and that's a real world IP address that only belongs to us and is unique in the internet. So as we allow the capture to go forward, okay, so I'm not interested in what's happening on the wireless there. We can see our packets down here. It's now out in the internet. If we have a look at it out in the internet, there it is. The source address is no longer our personal address, but it's the outside address of our router, and that is unique to our network. So that's heading off as it heads out from that particular device. Yeah, it's still the same. And we'll just very quickly play this through. So it goes out into the ISP, across the fiber, out into the core of the internet, through the internet switch, and it hits our NetCAD server. And if you look at the NetCAD server, the inbound, yep, it's coming from the source address, is our 82.10 address, and the destination is where it's just got to, the NetCAD server. And if we look at the outbound packet, the reply, obviously the reply, it just swaps the addresses round. It's now sourced from the NetCAD address, the NetCAD server, and the destination address where this packet needs to get back to is 82.10.0.101, which is the outside address of our router, and that's unique in the internet. Which now means when we allow this packet to traverse back, it hits the core internet, which then says, oh yeah, I know those group of addresses there, they belong to that particular ISP, therefore the packet is routed back to the ISP, and the ISP says, oh yeah, I know that address there, I doled that out to Bob's house, and it forwards it back Bob's router. Having got to Bob's router, let's have a look what happens now. So you see there's kind of some processing going on here. When we have a look at Bob's router, when it came in, obviously the destination address was 8210, that was the outside interface of the router, so we'd expect, sourced from the NetCAD server. But the outbound packet, if we have a look at that, the destination address is back to 192.168.0.100. So the router has remembered that it did that translation as the packet went out. So when the packet comes back, it does a translation back again, so that eventually the IP packet can be sent down to Bob. And you can see here it's arrived at Bob's laptop and it's got a tick because it was the right address. Obviously Bob's tablet didn't want it, but it was broadcast by the wireless network. So there you go. That's what happens with network address translation. We take our internal addresses, which are called private addresses, and these are the same for thousands and millions of homes around the place. And as they go out through our edge router, they borrow the IP address belonging to the edge interface on our routers, the internet facing interface. And that's unique in the internet, so that when the traffic goes out there, the internet can return it to our router, which has remembered the translation and returns it back to the appropriate device. And that's how we managed to get so many machines on the internet, all with the same addresses, all with these private addresses, and it all seems to work thanks to network address translation. Okay, so you've understood the concepts of NAT now. You understand that when Bob's PC goes out or Bob's laptop goes out, it borrows this external address from the router, the 82.10.0.100, and when Anne goes out, she borrows the address from her external IP address, 82.10.0.100. So that's how they remain unique. Bob was 101 at the end and Anne was 100 at the end. So they've got unique addresses. But the question should rise now: what happens if both Bob's laptop and Bob's tablet both try and get to the internet at the same time? They're both going to borrow this external IP address here. So when the traffic comes back from the internet to the router, then we're not going to be able to determine which one of the two devices it came from, because they're both coming back to the same IP address. Clearly it's not unique, it gets you back to the actual device, but we need some way to distinguish which one of the two original internal devices actually made this request. So let's see if we can understand how that works. Okay, so now you understand the concept of NAT, let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. The query we've got now really is what happened if both Bob's laptop and Bob's tablet both go out to the internet at the same time. They're both going to borrow this external IP address from the router, let's get it up there, the 82.10.0.101 address. The packets are going to go out to the internet, the replies are going to come back, they're going to come back to the same IP address, but how will the router know which one of these two internal devices to send it to, either Bob's laptop or Bob's tablet? It's only a problem if they're both going out at the same time, but clearly that's quite a realistic possibility. Indeed, it's actually more complicated than that. Bob's laptop might have two different web browsers open, Firefox and Google, and he might be using both of them to surf at the same time. Then they'll both go out to the router, and when it comes back, again it's to a single IP address. It's not clear how to send it or where to send it internally. So there's a potential of lots of traffic all going out at the same time, all borrowing the same external address. We need to understand a little bit more about what happens in such cases. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the simulation mode. We're just going to look at HTTP traffic this time, so I'm going to edit the filters and just look at HTTP. And Bob's laptop is going to go out and hit the netcad.com server, and Bob's tablet over here is going to go out and hit the bcu.ac.uk server. So let's have a look what happens when we do that. So we first of all click on Bob's laptop, and in the URL www.netcad.com, and hit go. Now obviously we're in the simulation mode, so we don't immediately get a reply. Bob's tablet, we're going to go to www.bcu.ac.uk, bcu.ac.uk, and again hit go. So our packets are queued up and we're ready to see the simulation. So let's start the capture. Here we go. We've got Bob's laptop going out. It's a, have a look at it, wireless framing, yep, IP, sourced from 100, which is Bob's laptop, to 5276, which is the NetCAD server. Notice here it's saying protocol 06, which tells me IP is carrying TCP. In TCP here we've got a destination port of 80, which is our web server, and it tells me I'm carrying HTTP traffic, and here's our HTTP traffic, which is a GET request for netcad.com. So all that looks okay. Let's have a look at the packet going on a little bit further. Goes up to the router. When we click here on the router, inbound we can see that the source address is still 0100, but when we look at the outbound packet, what we can see is the source address has been changed to 82.10.0.101. So we can see network address translation has taken place. But also, just make a note here, the source destination port is 80, yes, it's going to a web server. The source port is 1037. This is randomly allocated by the web client software, the web browser software inside Bob's laptop, so that when we see the reply coming back we know where to send it back to. It's 1037 before translation, but after translation it's been changed to 1042. So the process of network address translation on this particular router has also changed the ports, and we call this port address translation. Changed it to 1042. So if we watch this packet go out now a bit further, it will go out to the internet through the ISP, so it's down in the DSLAM, hits the switch, goes on its merry way. Now while that's been happening, let's have a look what else has gone on in the router here. This is another HTTP request. Let's have a look where this one has come from. This has come from Bob's laptop, and he's also sending out another GET request because he's not had a reply yet. He's actually getting quite bored. So again, this is packet tracer simulation. So he's already sent out that second request. So let's just follow this particular one through. Gets through all the way to there, and it gets down to the netcad.com server. And let's have a quick look. Inbound here, it's coming from 1042, which is our translated port from our translated IP address. And when we look at the reply, it's obviously going back to the translated IP address. That's the external interface of Bob's DSL router, and it's now going back to 1042, which again is our translated port. So if we allow this packet to return now, goes in through the internet switch. Oh, move that by mistake, put it back. Goes back from the ISP over the fiber, back to the switch, back through the repeater and the DSLAM, and ends up back at, one more step, Bob's router. If we have a look at the packet that's arriving now, the inbound packet was coming back to the external IP address, that's how it got routed there, coming back to port 1042. As it comes back through the network address translation process, we can see it gets returned back to Bob's laptop on 192.168.0.100, and it gets returned back to port 1037, which is the right process inside Bob's laptop. And we can send that one back now. And it goes back to Bob's laptop, where you'll see it gets accepted. Because it's wireless, it's a broadcast network, so Bob's tablet ignores it. So that's done the whole process now of the packet going from Bob's laptop, going out through his DSL router, and both port and address translation happening. Okay, so let's continue the animation now. Now if you remember, it seems a long time ago, but we actually also serve from Bob's tablet. Now in the real internet situation, as the request from Bob's laptop had gone out, the request from Bob's tablet would have gone out at the same time, or just fractionally behind. So we would have sent a packet out through the DSL router and been waiting for the reply whilst the request from Bob's tablet came in, so it would have had to deal with both at the same time. It's just the way Packet Tracer has dealt with these. It makes it look like they're done sequentially. They're not, they're done in parallel both at the same time. So if we capture this one going forward, remember Bob's tablet was going out to the BCU address, so let's have a look at the frame here. Inbound is coming from the tablet on 101. Again, it's from port 80, sourced from 1042 this time, and it's a web request for bcu.ac.uk. And the outbound here has translated the source IP address to 8210, and it's changed the source port to 1043. Notice it was, just to remind you, 1042 before. So again, it's translated the source port. Now in reality, both of these processes would have happened at the same time. So the router actually keeps a track of which source ports it translates as a way to identify the returning packets and make sure that they're passed back to the relevant devices. So the router can handle many multiple conversations, many multiple translations, because it's got thousands of ports to go at before it would kind of get itself tied up and start using duplicate ports. And remember, once the packet's returned, the port's freed up again to be used by another outgoing packet. So yeah, it's changed it to 1043. Let's just follow that through. It'll go out to the internet. Let's make sure it goes down to the right server, out over the fiber, and yeah, it goes down to the BCU web server. So inbound, as it arrived at the BCU web server, again we know the protocol was 6, so it was TCP. It was TCP, it's destined for port 80, so it's passed to the web server software on this particular PC, and the request was a GET request for the BCU website. And it was sourced from port 1043, destined to port 80. If we look at the outbound details now, obviously the destination IP address and source IP address are swapped, so it's now returning to the outside address of Bob's wireless router from the BCU web server. And again here the ports are swapped. The destination port is now 1043, and it's sourced from port 80, which is a web server. So if we play that back, it goes back over the internet, over the fiber connection, back through the ISP and the repeater and the DSLAM and the modem, and arrives back at Bob's router. When we look at it arriving at Bob's router, you can see here the destination IP address is Bob's external IP address, and the destination port is 1043, but because the router remembered it had translated that on the way out, when it passes it onto the LAN, it's translated it back. So the destination IP address is now 101, which is Bob's tablet, and the destination port has been changed back to 1042, which was the software process or the protocol or the port number on Bob's laptop of his actual web client software, his web browser software. So just finish that bit off. Should go down there, and it was for Bob's tablet, so we should get a big green tick there. Yep, and not for Bob's laptop. Again, remember, that's just a broadcast nature of wireless. So you've seen now how the Bob's laptop and Bob's tablet can both simultaneously go out to the internet, both sharing a common IP address, but by using port address translation as well, we're able to identify the returning packets and pass them back to the correct devices. So this process is called PAT, port address translation, and it's also known as NAT overloading. It's where we've got this single IP address here and we're using it for multiple internal devices. And this is going on your home networks all the time. And without it, we certainly wouldn't have the wide use of the internet that we've got today. So hopefully that's given you a good overview of NAT and PAT and what private addresses are and why we use them. Thanks very much for listening.